October 25th, 1944. Dawn broke over the waters east of Samar Island. A faint mist hovered above the sea, softening the horizon, hiding the terror that approached. In this fragile calm, three small Fletcher-class destroyers, USS Johnston, USS Hoel, and USS Heermann, sliced through the pre-dawn haze, hulls cutting the waves like knives through silk. Their captains knew the danger, yet no one aboard fully grasped the enormity of what lay ahead. Commander Ernest Evans of the USS Johnston, 36, a Cherokee and Creek descendant from Oklahoma, stood on the bridge, peering through binoculars. Beyond the veil of morning fog, the enemy emerged. The Yamato, her massive hull, displaced 72,000 tons, dwarfing any ship the destroyers could muster. Behind her, a fleet of 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers followed, their pagoda masts and immense superstructures gleaming faintly in the rising sun. Evans felt a chill run through him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The calculations were hopeless. The Japanese guns fired shells over 3,000 pounds, capable of ripping a destroyer apart with one hit. Yet, the young men in the crew did not flinch. They were tin cans, as the enemy and even some in their own fleet called them. Thin steel, fast engines, and courage. That was all they had. They were not designed to face battleships. They were designed to die. But Evans, with quiet determination, turned to his men. "We are here to fight, not to survive, but to buy time for the carriers. Anyone not willing to risk it, you know where the gangway is." None left. The destroyers accelerated, engines screaming, propellers churning the water into frothy wakes. Smoke funnels spat black ribbons into the air as each crew braced for the impossible. The morning light glinted on the surfaces of the enemy ships, revealing the sheer scale of the task ahead. Every sailor aboard Johnston, Hoel, and Heermann felt the weight of history pressing upon them. Radar operators, barely 20, eyes glued to the faint green blips on the screen, whispered the positions of enemy vessels to their officers. Gunners checked their mounts, fingers trembling, yet steadying themselves with the unspoken code of duty that had passed through generations of the Navy. The destroyers' hulls vibrated as their engines reached top speed, and the smell of oil and salt mingled in the crisp air. Evans's voice cut through the tension over the ship's intercom. "We are the thin line. Remember, we cannot match their armor or their firepower. What we can do is outmaneuver them, harass them, confuse them. If we strike, strike hard, and then vanish into the mist." The crew understood implicitly. Every man aboard knew the risks, yet the eyes that met Evans's were resolute, reflecting a rare, almost reckless courage. By 1000 hours, the Japanese fleet had detected the presence of the destroyers. Lookouts on the Yamato, through polished periscopes and binoculars, had already reported small silhouettes moving rapidly, weaving through the morning haze. The Japanese commanders, confident in their overwhelming superiority, laughed at the thought that mere destroyers could pose any real threat. The heavy battleships fired reconnaissance salvos, shells arcing high into the sky before plunging harmlessly into the ocean, their distant splashes sending geysers of water into the air. Yet, even as they watched the show of superiority, Evans and his colleagues prepared meticulously. Tactical diagrams spread across the bridge marked with tiny red notations indicating predicted firing arcs, torpedo ranges, and blind spots. Every inch of the ocean mattered. Every second could mean life or death. At 1100 hours, the first shots were fired. USS Johnston launched its torpedoes with precision born of long hours of practice, hurling the iron weapons silently through the morning calm. The water seemed to hold its breath as the sleek missiles cut across the sea, disappearing beneath the waves toward the Yamato. Shells from the Japanese destroyers and cruisers began to splash dangerously close, each impact sending shudders through the hull. Crew members clutched railings, praying silently or muttering words of encouragement to their shipmates. Evans barked orders, each phrase clipped and efficient. cutting through the cacophony of explosions and the roar of engines. The Johnston zigzagged, narrowly avoiding a series of incoming shells. The gunners returned fire, their rounds paltry against such vast targets, yet psychologically powerful, their explosions scattering shrapnel and smoke, forcing even the giant ships to adjust their aim. The Hoel, following in tight formation, executed a daring flanking maneuver. Its captain, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, 35, knew the odds were overwhelmingly against him. Yet, he embraced the desperate thrill of the engagement. Hoel's torpedoes streaked through the water with lethal elegance, aimed at the most vulnerable points of the Japanese line. Smoke and steam swirled around the destroyer, the result of nearby shell impacts striking the ocean and air alike. The Heermann, under Commander Robert Cole, the 34, kept close, a steel guardian watching the flank. Every decision mattered. Every movement could save a life or doom the crew. Orders flew like lightning. Port 2 degrees, starboard 5 degrees, prepare to fire. The words, shouted above the roar of engines and gunfire, were the only constant in a scene that seemed to teeter on the edge of chaos. As the morning wore on, the battle intensified. Each destroyer became a blur of motion, darting in and out of enemy lines, trading torpedo strikes for evasive maneuvers. The Yamato, enormous and slow, began to turn her massive hull to bring her main guns to bear. Shells the size of small houses hurtled through the air, each one capable of ending the life of every soul aboard a tin can in seconds. Evans realized that tactical skill and luck were the only shields against certain death. Yet, the men fought on, their actions almost ritualistic in precision, honed by months of discipline, drills, and unspoken bravery. In moments of clarity amid the chaos, Evans glimpsed individual acts of heroism, sailors exposing themselves to enemy fire to relay messages, gunners calculating angles while smoke choked the deck, engineers in the engine rooms refusing to abandon their stations despite the roar of damage around them. Each small act rippled outward, contributing to the fragile survival of the entire force. By 1200 hours, the Johnston had drawn concentrated fire from multiple enemy vessels. The thin steel hull shuddered as the first shell tore through the aft, killing a dozen men instantly and wounding many more. Smoke poured from the deck, mingling with the mist that clung stubbornly to the sea. Evans, face streaked with sweat and soot, did not falter. His voice, calm but commanding, echoed over the intercom. "Keep her steady. Fire when ready. Stay the course. We have our mission." Every officer responded with precise orders. Every crew member followed instinctively. Even as the Johnston listed dangerously, Evans managed to launch another torpedo, aimed straight for the Yamato's starboard side. Moments later, a distant explosion hinted at a near miss. There was no time to celebrate. Survival was measured in seconds, in heartbeats, in the precise arc of each shell. The Hoel, caught in a crossfire from a heavy cruiser and a battleship, suffered devastating hits. Decks splintered, men were thrown from positions, and the once proud destroyer seemed to buckle under the relentless assault. Yet the crew continued to return fire, their torpedoes streaking through water that now seemed more enemy than friend. Lieutenant Commander Copeland, recognizing the hopelessness of conventional engagement, pushed Hoel into a daring torpedo run. The destroyer charged, weaving between salvos, its speed the only thing keeping it from destruction. The act was suicidal, yet necessary. Every second of delay imposed upon the Japanese fleet was another second gained for the American carriers, their planes circling far to the east, unaware of the desperate ballet unfolding on the waves below. The Heermann, too, felt the weight of combat. Shells struck near misses, sending cascades of water over the deck. The smell of cordite smoke and sea salt hung thick in the air. Commander Cole shouted over the din, coordinating attacks with Johnston and Hoel, ensuring that their torpedo spreads were synchronized. Precision became their shield, speed their armor, and courage their only weapon. Sailors, barely adults, reacted with remarkable discipline, each aware that one misstep could lead to instant death. The destroyers, though small and fragile, moved with a grace that belied the carnage surrounding them. They were alive in their motion, defiant in the face of overwhelming odds, dancing between the jaws of monsters that could crush them with a single blow. By 1300 hours, the Yamato and her escorts had been harried beyond expectation. Torpedo hits, near misses, and aggressive maneuvering had forced the Japanese fleet to change formation repeatedly. Evans realized that despite staggering losses and the ever-present threat of annihilation, they were succeeding in their mission. The American carriers, still hundreds of miles away, were buying time, their aircraft readying for strikes that could turn the tide. Each destroyer now bore scars of battle, splintered railings, scorched decks, and the haunting absence of men who had fallen only minutes before, but the spirit of resistance endured. The Johnston, listing further, continued to press forward, ramming into the heart of the enemy's formation. Evans's voice, calm and measured despite the chaos, directed the crew with the precision of a maestro guiding a symphony in the middle of a storm. Every order had to be executed flawlessly. Every crew member had to anticipate the next moment, and every second mattered. Outside, shells screamed through the morning mist, yet within the confines of the bridge, the human heart and intellect battled against inevitability itself. The destroyer's torpedoes streaked toward the Yamato, and explosions rippled along the Japanese hull, small victories in a vast ocean of destruction. As the battle pressed into mid-afternoon, the sacrifices of the tin cans became apparent. Hoel had taken mortal hits and was beginning to sink, her crew abandoning ship into the sea. Heermann bore heavy damage but remained afloat, continuing attacks with stubborn resolve. Johnston, wounded and burning, maneuvered desperately to strike again. Evans's own body shook with exhaustion, yet he pressed onward, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline, duty, and sheer refusal to yield. Every man aboard knew that the likelihood of survival was slim. Yet, the mission required that they act without hesitation. Their courage was a shield, their determination a weapon, and their presence a thorn in the side of an enemy that underestimated the valor of the small and fragile. By 1400 hours, the Johnston had drawn the concentrated attention of 3 battleships and a heavy cruiser. Each salvo tore through the deck and superstructure, igniting fires that raced uncontrollably. Evans moved from station to station, ensuring every torpedo launch, every gun firing, every maneuver was executed to perfection. Smoke filled the corridors, yet the men pressed on undeterred. From below decks, the engine room roared with energy, propelling the destroyer with relentless fury, even as the upper structures burned. Outside, the sea churned violently, a mirror to the chaos of combat above it. Yet in the midst of devastation, the human spirit burned brighter than ever. By 1500 hours, the Johnston had delivered its final torpedo strikes against the Yamato and her escorts, contributing to the disruption of the Japanese advance. Evans, aware of the near certainty of his own ship's fate, continued to lead, a figure of calm amidst the storm. Around him, sailors struggled to contain fires, secure the wounded, and maintain offensive operations. The thin steel hull groaned under stress, yet the crew's courage never faltered. They were tin cans, no longer in perception. They were warriors of resolve, an embodiment of valor that would echo through history. At 6:37 a.m., the escort carriers of Task Unit 77.4.3, Taffy 3, began launching aircraft. Wildcats and Avengers, configured mostly for ground support, scrambled, armed with small bombs and rockets. Their pilots, aware that their ships were no match for capital warships, climbed into the sky, engines screaming, hearts racing. From the bridge of the Johnston, Evans watched the Japanese advance. He calculated every distance, every torpedo range, every smokescreen that might mask their movements. At 10,000 yards, the first salvo came from Yamato's 18-inch guns. The sea erupted with columns of water, hundreds of feet high. Red, yellow, green, and blue sprays marked shells from different ships, each impact a warning, a threat, a countdown to destruction. Evans issued the command, all ahead flank smokescreens at maximum, torpedo attack in 5 minutes. The destroyers began weaving a deadly path through a storm of enemy fire, firing 5-inch shells at close range, insufficient to penetrate armor but capable of wreaking havoc on superstructures and exposed crews. USS Hoel, commanded by Leon Kindberger, 33, joined the fray, moving at suicidal speed toward the nearest Japanese heavy cruiser. Tracer rounds stitched the misty air. Every movement was precise, every decision an act of defiance. The men on deck knew that each salvo from Yamato could obliterate them. They called themselves tin cans, but they were engines of courage, of audacity. Evans's voice, calm, yet edged with steel, carried over the intercom. "Prepare for torpedo launch. Steady as she goes. Remember your training. Remember what we fight for." Below decks, the engineering crew strained against failing boilers, engines trembling under stress yet pushing the ship faster than seemed possible for its size. The Johnston's decks were slick with seawater and oil, the air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of cordite. Sailors leaned into the wind, hands gripping railings, eyes darting between horizon and enemy. From above, the Wildcats executed dive attacks, releasing bombs that barely scratched the Japanese cruiser's armor, yet sowed confusion and forced evasive maneuvers. Every second, the Johnston, Hoel, and Heermann moved closer to the heart of the enemy formation, each ship threading a path through a gauntlet of destruction that would have ended ordinary vessels instantly. At 7:15 a.m., Hoel reached firing range. Kindberger's order was simple: engage and survive if you can. The destroyer accelerated into a path that intersected the heavy cruiser's projected course. Guns roared, shells streaking outward, smoke trailing like the banner of defiance. The Japanese returned fire, salvo after salvo, and the Hoel shuddered as near misses tore columns of water along her sides. Crewmen on deck braced themselves for impact, some whispering prayers, others laughing nervously to mask fear. The torpedo officers readied the tubes, counting down silently, while radar and sonar operators tracked the shifting positions of battleships and cruisers. Each moment was a fragile balance between life and annihilation. When the torpedoes were launched, their streamlined bodies sliced through the ocean with deadly intent, disappearing into the mist before detonations sent geysers into the sky. The Johnston, following slightly behind, faced her own trials. Shells from 2 battleships and a heavy cruiser slammed into the water around her, their massive concussions shaking the thin steel hull. Evans, 36, remained on the bridge, issuing orders with clarity born of experience. "Helm, 20 degrees starboard. Guns, hold fire until optimal range. Smoke, double the coverage." The crew responded instinctively, each action rehearsed 1,000 times in training, yet now tested against the unforgiving reality of war. Fires broke out on the upper decks, yet sailors rushed to contain them, buckets of water and hoses in hand, unwilling to yield even a moment of ground to the enemy. The 5-inch guns barked back, aimed at bridge structures, searchlights, and gun crews exposed above, trying to inflict damage where the armor was weakest. The Johnston was a fragile speck in a sea of steel giants, yet her presence made the Japanese adjust their formations, a testament to courage over size. By 7:30 a.m., the Heermann, under Commander Robert Cole, 34, took a daring course to intercept another cruiser. The destroyer's speed and maneuverability allowed her to dodge salvo after salvo, yet the hull shook violently with each near miss. Smoke and steam enveloped her decks, the sounds of explosions and shouting creating a symphony of chaos. Torpedo tubes were readied, the men inside working quickly, despite the deafening noise and danger. Cole knew that one successful strike could disrupt the Japanese formation, buying precious minutes for the escort carriers and their aircraft. As the torpedoes streaked toward the target, explosions erupted along the enemy ship's hull, small victories amid devastation, proving that even tiny vessels could impose their will on seemingly invincible foes. Above the battlefield, the Taffy 3 aircraft struggled against the odds. Wildcats, designed for air-to-air combat, carried small bombs and rockets intended for ground support. Yet they dived fearlessly into the Japanese ships, strafing gun crews, disrupting decks, and forcing evasive maneuvers. Avengers, loaded with depth charges and bombs, made slow, deliberate runs at cruisers and destroyers, engines straining, every hit a gamble that could change the tide of battle. Smoke and fire from the ships below obscured targets, yet pilots pressed on, aware that the fate of their comrades depended on every maneuver, every release of ordnance. The sky was a patchwork of smoke, tracer rounds and splintered clouds, a chaotic canvas painted by courage and desperation. By 8 a.m., the Johnston had pressed into the heart of the enemy line. Evans issued a decisive command. "All ahead! Flank! Launch torpedoes now!" The destroyer accelerated, bow cutting through waves as her torpedoes streaked silently beneath the turbulent water toward Yamato and her escorts. The massive Japanese battleships, their guns firing relentlessly, now had to adjust to the small but aggressive threat. Near misses shook the Johnston violently, splintering railings and sending men sprawling, yet the crew's focus never wavered. Below decks, engineers kept the engines screaming, pumping every ounce of power through the hull to maintain momentum. On the bridge, Evans and his officers monitored every movement, calculating angles, ranges, and timing with unerring precision. Each action was a delicate thread in the tapestry of survival and defiance. At 8:30 a.m., Hoel had sustained critical hits. The once proud destroyer was listing sharply, fires consuming the superstructure, yet the crew continued to fight, returning fire with what remained of their guns. Kindberger, recognizing the hopelessness of survival, executed one final torpedo run aimed directly at a heavy cruiser. The ship raced forward, weaving between incoming fire, each man knowing that survival was unlikely, yet necessary for the mission. Explosions rocked the deck as shells impacted around them, the smell of cordite smoke and seawater filling every corner of the vessel. Sailors shouted orders, prayed, and gritted their teeth as torpedoes were launched into the enemy formation, disappearing beneath the waves in silent death. The Heermann, now alone in her aggressive maneuvers, faced near-constant salvos from enemy ships. Each shell that missed by mere feet left grooves in the deck and sent spray of water over the crew, a constant reminder of mortality. Cole remained calm, directing evasive maneuvers, torpedo launches, and gunfire with unshakable composure. The destroyer, though battered and bruised, pressed the attack, exploiting every weakness in the Japanese formation. Smoke screens from both American and Japanese ships created a shifting battlefield where perception and instinct mattered more than size or firepower. The men aboard became acutely aware that their courage and skill were their only shields against overwhelming destruction. By 9 a.m., the Johnston had taken multiple hits but remained operational. Fires raged across the deck, water pumps struggled to contain the flames, and casualties mounted. Evans, his face streaked with sweat and soot, continued to lead. "We hold our line. We give everything for our brothers and for the carriers. Keep her steady, keep fighting." The crew responded with determination born of necessity, manning guns, fighting fires, tending to the wounded, and maintaining the destroyer's speed. Each 5-inch shell fired, each torpedo launched, was a calculated act of courage, a defiance of fate itself. Outside, Yamato's 18-inch guns continued to fire with devastating accuracy. Yet, the tin cans pressed forward, exploiting their speed and maneuverability, sowing confusion and forcing enemy ships to alter their deadly trajectories. By 9:30 a.m., the toll became evident. Hoel sank beneath the waves, her crew rescued by small boats and brave sailors who risked their lives to save comrades. The Johnston, burning and listing, pressed on. Every torpedo launched a reminder that courage could bend the rules of engagement even against overwhelming odds. The Heermann, still maneuvering aggressively, disrupted another cruiser's advance, forcing it to alter course and lose speed. The sea was a chaotic expanse of smoke, fire, and metal, yet within it, the actions of a few determined destroyers created a ripple of impact far beyond their size. By 10 a.m., the Japanese advance had slowed. The escort carriers, their aircraft attacking relentlessly, now had time to regroup, and the sailors aboard the remaining destroyers continued to harass the enemy, exploiting every weakness, every hesitation, and every miscalculation. Evans, exhausted yet resolute, maintained command, issuing precise orders and coordinating with Cole aboard Heermann. Smoke and fire choked the decks, casualties mounted, and every sailor knew that survival was no longer guaranteed. Yet they fought on, propelled by duty, courage, and the unbreakable bond forged in the inferno of battle. By 10:30 a.m., the Johnston had delivered her final torpedo attacks, scoring hits that disrupted the enemy's formation. Fires continued to rage, decks continued to shatter under near misses, and yet the destroyer and her crew remained symbols of indomitable spirit. The Heermann, despite heavy damage, continued to engage, forcing the Japanese to contend with a threat they had underestimated. Every maneuver, every salvo, every torpedo launched was a testament to courage over size, skill over force, and the unyielding determination of sailors who refused to surrender even in the face of near-certain destruction. At 7:10 a.m., the Johnston turned sharply into the enemy line, closing to less than 7,000 yards. Evans unleashed his Mark 15 torpedoes, 5 missiles, streaking silently through the choppy sea toward the cruiser Kumano. Smoke wrapped the ship like a shroud, creating a veil of confusion that masked every movement. The Japanese fleet hesitated, massive guns pivoting uncertainly as they tried to assess the threat from these small, aggressive vessels. For 15 minutes, Johnston's 5-inch guns hammered relentlessly, rounds tearing through superstructures, destroying fire control stations, and killing exposed crews who had no time to seek cover. One torpedo struck, ripping Kumano's bow off and crippling the cruiser entirely, dragging a nearby escort into chaos. The water boiled around the wreck, spray and debris rising in a testament to the power of precision over size. Evans's eyes never left the horizon, calculating angles, distances, and the perfect moment for the next salvo, knowing that every second bought precious breathing room for the escort carriers far to the east. Meanwhile, Hoel and Heermann accelerated on intersecting courses, each aiming at Japanese battleships that dwarfed them in every conceivable measure. Hoel's captain, Leon Kindberger, 33, gritted his teeth as the destroyer's engines screamed under strain. Torpedo tubes opened, launching iron weapons aimed at the battleships Kongo and Haruna. The sleek missiles cut through the waves with silent menace, disappearing into smoke and spray before detonating with devastating effect. Heermann's guns rattled over the turbulent water, spraying the superstructure of another heavy cruiser with deadly bursts, shattering gun emplacements, and sending Japanese sailors scrambling for cover. The coordinated attacks of these small vessels, fast, nimble, and fearless, began to bend the vast Japanese formation into unfamiliar and dangerous angles. For 10 critical minutes, the Yamato, the largest battleship in history, her hull a floating fortress, turned north to evade, disrupted repeatedly by the daring maneuvers of 3 tiny destroyers that should have been no more than insignificant shadows against such might. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Chaos erupted across the decks of the Japanese fleet. Orders overlapped, shouted commands competing with the roar of cannon fire and the screams of the wounded. Guns fired at empty splashes in the water, rounds plowing through smoke and mist instead of their intended targets. Damage control crews ran frantically, patches of fire leaping from deck to deck. The sheer audacity of the American destroyers created confusion, turning the Japanese advantage into vulnerability. Every maneuver by the Johnston, Hoel, and Heermann bought precious minutes for the escort carriers, their planes circling above, preparing to strike at distant targets that could never be reached without this desperate sacrifice. The tiny ships became moving phantoms, slipping through lines of fire that would have shattered any ordinary vessel. In that moment, courage outweighed metal, audacity outmatched tonnage, and history was quietly rewritten on the rolling waves of Samar Island. Evans, standing amid smoke and the deafening roar of guns, moved along the Johnston's bridge with unbroken composure. His face, streaked with sweat, salt, and grime, betrayed no hint of fear. He issued commands with precision, guiding his crew through maneuvers that seemed impossible even to those trained in the most advanced naval tactics. Steady her course, launch torpedoes portside, guns target enemy fire directors. His voice carried over the chaos, a beacon of order amidst a storm of disorder. The crew responded with near miraculous speed, reloading torpedo tubes, adjusting gun angles, and bracing for impacts that would surely tear through their fragile hull. Around them, smoke columns twisted skyward from nearby hits, salt water sprayed across the decks, and the smell of cordite mixed with burning oil to form a tangible reminder of mortality. Yet, no one faltered. Every man aboard understood the stakes. Every man embraced the inevitability of risk with an unspoken oath to fight for each other, and for the carriers whose survival depended on them. The Hoel, moving with suicidal speed, darted between enemy salvos, every evasive maneuver calculated to minimize exposure while maximizing offensive potential. Tracer rounds stitched the misty air around the vessel like lethal threads. Yet, the crew pressed forward. Kindberger, observing the massive battleships through binoculars, recognized the narrow margins separating survival from destruction. Each decision was instantaneous, yet precise. A degree of heading, a moment to launch torpedoes, a command to fire guns. Crewmen worked as extensions of their ship, each action rehearsed, refined, and executed under conditions that would have tested the courage of seasoned veterans. Torpedo after torpedo was launched, streaking toward Japanese vessels with deadly purpose. Explosions rippled through the water, sending sheets of spray high into the air. Bridges were destroyed, gunners were killed, and fire erupted along decks. The Hoel, though small and battered, had become a force capable of commanding attention, forcing battleships to alter course and lose critical seconds. Heermann mirrored the daring of her sister ships. Commander Robert Cole, 34, navigated through a wall of smoke and fire, guns roaring, torpedo tubes spitting death into the enemy line. One torpedo struck the stern of a heavy cruiser, sending the vessel into an uncontrollable turn, its gunners scrambling in disbelief. The destroyer's 5-inch guns peppered exposed decks, cutting down crews with bursts that echoed across the waves. The precision of these attacks was remarkable given the chaos surrounding the ships. Smoke obscured vision, explosions shook the decks, and the wind tossed spray across gun crews' faces. Yet, every action Cole commanded was executed flawlessly, a testament to discipline, skill, and the resolve of sailors trained to fight beyond what seemed humanly possible. The Japanese fleet, massive and imposing, reeled under the audacity of tiny destroyers that refused to yield. By 7:35 a.m., the Johnston had closed to a distance that made the next torpedo salvo critical. Evans, calculating range and speed, barked the final command: "Fire all remaining torpedoes, maximum spread." The Mark 15 weapons leapt from their tubes, disappearing into the foaming sea with silent menace. Simultaneously, the 5-inch guns continued their relentless pounding, targeting fire control stations, radar arrays, and exposed gun crews. Each impact caused a cascade of damage, ripping through decks and superstructures, igniting fires and sowing disarray among the Japanese sailors. Near misses from the enemy's massive guns splashed dangerously close, sending torrents of water over the Johnston's deck. Yet, the crew remained steadfast. Every sailor had a role, every role was essential, and every action contributed to the impossible ballet of survival and aggression unfolding in the heart of the Japanese formation. The chaos reached its peak as Yamato pivoted to evade, her 18-inch guns swinging with enormous arcs, yet failing to target the swift destroyers effectively. Tracer rounds streaked past. Shells slammed into water, and smoke hung thick in the air, obscuring sight lines and disrupting coordination. For 10 minutes, the 3 American destroyers became the nucleus of a vortex of confusion, forcing battleships and cruisers alike to adjust course repeatedly. The tiny ships, vulnerable and fragile, moved with a speed and precision that made the difference between life and death. In that crucial span, the escort carriers gained invaluable distance, their aircraft ascending and preparing to strike, while below, the tin cans pressed the attack with courage that defied the logic of survival. Evans, his face grim and resolute, watched the results of his calculations unfold. Every torpedo that found a target, every shell that crippled an enemy gun, was a validation of training, courage, and leadership. Fires on the Johnston's deck raged uncontrolled in some sections. Men had been wounded or killed, and every impact threatened to end the ship entirely. Yet, through smoke, chaos, and terror, the destroyer continued to advance, delivering precise strikes that disrupted the Japanese advance. Crewmen shouted over the din, adjusting guns, reloading torpedo tubes, fighting fires, and attending to the wounded, their actions coordinated with almost preternatural timing. The ship became more than steel. It became a vessel of intent, of defiance, and of heroism, a spearhead aimed directly at an overwhelmingly powerful enemy. By 7:50 a.m., the cumulative effect of the destroyer's assault was evident. Kumano's bow had been severed. Kongo was zigzagging to avoid torpedoes. Haruna had temporarily ceased coordinated fire, and Yamato herself had been forced to alter course multiple times, unable to bring her full firepower to bear on the American ships. Every second gained allowed the carriers to increase distance, to climb above the horizon, and to launch aircraft that would harry the Japanese fleet in subsequent hours. The Johnston, despite taking damage to her hull and superstructure, pressed on, a testament to the resilience of both ship and crew. Hoel, though critically damaged, continued to harass enemy vessels before succumbing to fatal hits. Heermann, battered yet operational, maintained offensive pressure, striking exposed crews and forcing misalignment in the enemy formation. At 8 a.m., the Johnston had completed her final torpedo salvo, and Evans, surveying the scene, recognized the extraordinary achievement of 3 small destroyers against a fleet of overwhelming size. Fires still consumed portions of the deck, casualties lay where they had fallen, and smoke hung in thick clouds over the vessel. Yet, the attack had succeeded. The Japanese advance had been delayed, their formations disrupted, and the escort carriers had escaped toward safety. In that moment, the fragile tin cans, engines of courage and audacity, had rewritten the rules of engagement. The battle, though unfinished, had demonstrated that bravery, precision, and determination could counterbalance the might of even the largest warships ever built. The chaos slowly subsided as Yamato and her escorts regrouped. Yet, the psychological impact of the daring destroyer attacks lingered. Evans, standing on the bridge, acknowledged the sacrifices of his men. The roar of engines continued, smoke plumes still twisted above the waves, and the cries of wounded sailors punctuated the rhythmic pounding of 5-inch guns. Heermann and the surviving crew pressed their attacks with cautious aggression, knowing that the danger remained, but that the enemy's momentum had been checked. Around them, the vast Pacific Ocean bore witness to the courage of a handful of men, the resilience of small vessels, and the unpredictable calculus of war, where audacity could momentarily overcome overwhelming force. By 8:30 a.m., the Johnston, Heermann, and surviving Wildcats had carved a path of disruption through the Japanese formation, each vessel and pilot performing at the peak of human courage and skill. The destroyers' hulls bore scars, decks were charred, and casualties had been grievous. Yet the mission had been accomplished, the carriers were safe, the enemy temporarily disorganized, and history itself had been shaped by the bold charge of tin cans against giants. Evans, 36, Kintberger, 33, and Cole, 34, knew that the legacy of their actions would endure long after the battle, a testament to valor, discipline, and the extraordinary power of ordinary men committed to extraordinary deeds. The price was immediate. At 8:45 a.m., the Johnston was hit repeatedly. Secondary 6-inch shells tore apart the after-engine room, igniting fuel and oil that spread rapidly across decks, while the blast obliterated gun mounts and killed Commander Ernest Evans, 36, instantly on the bridge. Shrapnel raked through the decks, splintering steel and sending sailors sprawling in all directions. Electrical systems failed, plunging sections of the ship into darkness. The rudder jammed, steering control was lost, and alarms screamed from every corner of the vessel. Yet, despite the carnage and chaos, the crew pressed on. Sailors manually turned the jammed rudders, adjusting course inch by inch. Gunners reloaded 5-inch guns by hand, despite shattered mounts and fallen comrades, while torpedo crews recalibrated tubes to fire under impossible conditions. The ship's deck was slick with blood, seawater, oil, and smoke, and yet the men continued, their determination a tangible force, holding together a vessel that should have sunk within minutes. Every act was meticulous, born of training and necessity, every movement a testament to courage that refused to bow before destruction. Hoel, meanwhile, bore the brunt of Japanese fury. At the same hour, a massive shell slammed into her bridge, killing the commanding officer and destroying communications systems entirely. Fires erupted along deck plating and superstructure, thick black smoke curling into the morning sky. The ship began to list dangerously, water pouring in through hull breaches as nearby explosions shook her violently. Yet, Hoel surged forward, her crew undeterred. Torpedoes remained armed, and gunners continued to fire. Adjusting angles by instinct rather than command, sailors moved with uncanny coordination, passing commands through gestures and shouted orders, improvising where technology had failed. One torpedo tube, nearly blown off by a direct hit, was reloaded by hand, the weapon launched into the sea with deadly accuracy. Every second of advance meant another moment of protection for the carriers that lingered over the horizon, their survival dependent on the audacity of these battered vessels. The tiny destroyer, listed and burning, became a moving fortress of sheer will, defying physics and fate simultaneously. Heermann, maneuvering in near-zero visibility, from smoke and fire, faced an equally punishing environment. Flashes from Japanese guns lit the thick morning fog, illuminating the shattered decks, and the men crouched behind splintered barriers. Collision alarms sounded continuously as waves, smoke, and debris created the illusion of phantom threats on every side. Commander Robert Cole, 34, adjusted course with minimal guidance, relying on crew intuition and charts, while gunners targeted openings in the enemy formation with deadly accuracy. Torpedoes were launched from the starboard side, finding their marks in the gaps between Japanese battleships, ripping through hulls with explosions that sprayed water and flames skyward. The Heermann's deck was a whirlwind of fire, smoke, and shouting, yet every action coordinated perfectly, each man aware that their survival was secondary to the mission. Delay, disrupt, and distract. The destroyer wove through a deadly maze, dodging shells and collisions with speed and precision that seemed impossible for a vessel of its size. Through courage alone, the three destroyers forced Yamato and her escorts into defensive maneuvers. The massive battleship altered course repeatedly, 18-inch guns pivoting with furious arcs, while heavy cruisers and light cruisers attempted to regain firing positions disrupted by the audacity of the tin cans. Each sacrifice, each burned engine room, each shattered hull contributed to the single goal that united every crewman aboard these small ships: save the carriers. Smoke and fire became both shield and weapon, veiling approaches, obscuring movements, and confusing enemy gunners. Bullets, shrapnel, and massive shells tore through metal, men, and machinery, yet no act of fear ever touched the decks of these vessels. Every motion, every salvo, every evasive maneuver was executed with the precision of men determined to impose their will on destiny itself. By 9 a.m., Johnston, though heavily damaged, continued to engage. Fires raged uncontrollably in the aft sections, smoke pouring through ventilation systems, yet gunners remained at their posts, firing on Japanese gun crews whenever sighted. Torpedoes were launched at staggering proximity to enemy hulls, some passing within yards of massive gun turrets, detonating in water columns that disrupted formations and forced evasive maneuvers. Engineers below decks, working amidst steam, fire, and electrical hazards, coaxed the remaining engines to life, providing speed sufficient to maintain offensive capability. The deck officers, despite wounds and exhaustion, continued issuing orders in fragmented phrases, gestures, and shouted commands. Every man aboard functioned as an extension of the vessel, a symbiotic relationship of skill, courage, and desperation that enabled Johnston to remain a threat despite her grievous injuries. Hoel, meanwhile, had reached the limits of human endurance. Fires burned across the forward deck, smoke choking gun crews, yet the remaining sailors continued to fire torpedoes at Japanese battleships and cruisers. One torpedo found the stern of a heavy cruiser, tearing a gash that sent water cascading across the decks and forcing the enemy ship to alter course, throwing formations into disarray. Communications were dead, so orders passed from sailor to sailor, creating an improvised chain of command that functioned with uncanny precision. Fire hoses were used simultaneously to douse flames and cool overheated gun barrels, while men carried wounded comrades to safer sections of the ship. The crew understood the inevitability of sacrifice, yet pressed forward with quiet determination, knowing that every second of delay imposed on the Japanese fleet could determine the fate of hundreds aboard escort carriers, still miles away. Heermann, now partially obscured by the rising smoke and spray, engaged in relentless harassment. Torpedoes streaked from starboard and port tubes, some detonating against hulls, others in water columns that obscured vision for enemy gunners. Decks shook with nearby hits, men were thrown from positions, and metal screamed under stress, yet Cole, 34, and his officers maintained composure, issuing instructions with clarity. Guns fired continuously, targeting exposed crews, command stations, and lightly armored sections of battleships and cruisers. Each salvo, each torpedo, each maneuver chipped away at the enemy's cohesion. Though tiny compared to the Japanese fleet, the Heermann had become a nucleus of disruption, a moving testament to human resolve against insurmountable odds. By 9:30 a.m., the effect of cumulative sacrifice was evident. Yamato, Kongo, Haruna, and accompanying cruisers had lost cohesion, turning repeatedly to avoid torpedoes, adjust firing angles, and contend with smoke-obscured threats. Johnston, Hoel, and Heermann had drawn enemy attention fully, allowing the escort carriers to gain critical distance, ascend toward higher altitudes, and launch air support that would continue to harass the Japanese throughout the morning. Fires on the decks of the tin cans had not diminished their offensive output. Rather, smoke and flame provided concealment for maneuvering, creating a paradoxical shield where danger itself became cover. Sailors moved like automatons of will, their actions choreographed by necessity, instinct, and unbreakable resolve. Despite grievous damage, Johnston continued to fire until 9:45 a.m. The aft gun mount was destroyed, yet other batteries remained operational. Engineers below decks worked in near darkness, replacing ruptured piping and rerouting power manually. Crewmen braced torpedo tubes by hand, adjusting for the shifting orientation of the ship as rudder control remained limited. Every torpedo launched, every gun fired, and every evasive maneuver executed was a microcosm of courage, precision, and audacity. Evans, though killed earlier, had left a crew trained and disciplined enough to continue his mission without hesitation, proving that leadership endures even after its source is gone. Hoel, by this time, had succumbed to critical damage. Haze engulfed the superstructure, the list became terminal, and the crew prepared for abandonment. Yet, until the final moment, sailors continued to fire torpedoes, adjusting their aim based on visual cues and instinct. Life rafts were readied, wounded were assisted overboard, and every action prioritized the protection of the carriers above personal safety. The final torpedo, launched with a hissing release, struck near a cruiser's bow, forcing another course correction that contributed to the overall disarray of the Japanese formation. Hoel's sacrifice had meaning. Each hit, each maneuver, each delay imposed on the enemy ensured survival for vessels far too valuable to risk under ordinary conditions. Heermann pressed on, a battered but still formidable vessel. Fires burned across upper decks, smoke obscured vision, and the decks were littered with debris, yet the destroyer continued to weave through gaps in Japanese formations. Torpedoes streaked outward, gun crews fired with unrelenting rhythm, and the ship became a moving testament to courage itself. Commander Cole, 34, issued orders with precision, coordinating maneuvers that maximized effect while minimizing exposure. Though danger remained constant, every successful torpedo strike, every disruption of enemy fire bought time, space, and opportunity for carriers and aircraft that had no means of direct defense. The Heermann's crew operated as one organism, driven not by fear, but by necessity, by honor, and by the understanding that the survival of many depended on the sacrifice of a few. By 10 a.m., the Japanese fleet had been forced into a pattern of constant defensive adjustment. Yamato, though still imposing, could not bring her full power to bear. Heavy cruisers and light cruisers were unable to maintain formation, and battleships zigzagged to evade torpedoes launched by tiny destroyers whose crews refused to surrender. Johnston, though mortally wounded, had contributed significantly to the disruption. Hoel had been lost, her crew rescued or perished as necessary, and Heermann had sustained heavy damage but remained operational. The combined effect of their audacity, skill, and sacrifice had created a temporal and tactical advantage that allowed Taffy 3's carriers to escape almost unscathed, their aircraft now able to launch coordinated attacks from superior positions. Smoke, fire, shrapnel, and relentless Japanese fire marked the decks of the remaining tin cans. Yet, not one sailor hesitated. Each maneuver, each salvo, each torpedo launched was both calculated and courageous, a defiance of the laws of physics, probability, and military doctrine. Through sheer will, discipline, and bravery, the three destroyers had forced a fleet vastly superior in size and firepower to react defensively, slowing their advance, damaging multiple ships, and, most importantly, buying the escort carriers precious minutes that ensured their survival. These moments, though soaked in fire and sacrifice, would echo throughout naval history as a testament to the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. By 10:30 a.m., the battlefield had shifted. Japanese formations remained disorganized. Damage was evident on multiple heavy cruisers and battleships, and smoke from burning destroyers and scattered hits obscured vision. Johnston, though battered, fired the last torpedo salvo possible. Heermann continued to engage remaining targets with precision, while Hoel's absence was marked by the quiet heroism of her crew's final acts. The cumulative effect of sacrifice, fire, and unrelenting aggression had succeeded in its ultimate objective: to protect the carriers, to delay the enemy, and to prove that courage and determination can defy even the most impossible odds. By 7:40 a.m., the carriers slipped away under rain, smoke, and confusion. The Japanese fleet, expecting easy victory, found itself fractured and wary. 3 destroyers had carved a gap, saving hundreds of lives. Johnston sank beneath the waves, mission complete. Hoel followed, torn apart by shells, her torpedoes delivered. Heermann, though damaged, limped toward open waters with a skeleton crew. Courage, audacity, and leadership had overcome impossible odds. Surviving airmen confirmed that without these bold actions, Taffy 3 could have been annihilated, jeopardizing the Leyte landings. History remembered their sacrifice as decisive and heroic. Years later, veterans of Taffy 3 recalled that morning with solemn pride. The thin steel hulls, once derided, had become enduring symbols of defiance. Commander Ernest Evans, 36, and his men were posthumously honored, their names etched forever in naval history. The story of Johnston, Hoel, and Heermann became legend, a testament to courage overcoming firepower. Small, determined forces had disrupted the mightiest fleets. Japanese Admiral Kurita later admitted he had never anticipated such resistance. The legacy of the tin cans endured, inspiring generations, proving that bravery, skill, and audacity could shape history even against overwhelming odds. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.